wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Good day, and welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast, where we discuss the ancient philosophy of Stoicism and how it applies to modern life. Steve has kindly agreed to let me do a solo episode today. Last week, Steve and I talked about lessening anxiety and fear related to thoughts of our own death. It is a very important topic and one that merits frequent attention. However, death isn't coming just for us, but also for the ones that we love. Unless we die young, it is likely that we will have the experience of losing friends and relatives to death. We 21st century folks like to pretend that death is something that can be ignored and put from our minds, as if that would shelter us from it touching our lives. But that is only setting us up for shocking and debilitating grief when death inevitably comes. Like many topics in Stoicism, there is some variance of opinion and approach in regard to the death of friends and loved ones. Here is one passage by Epictetus. With everything of which you are fond, remember to say to yourself, beginning with the very least things, what is its nature? If you are fond of a jug, say, I am fond of a jug, for when it is broken, you will not be disturbed. If you kiss your own child or wife, say to yourself that you are kissing a human being, and when they die, you will not be disturbed. Epictetus, Enchiridion 3. Epictetus is frequently controversial, but to my mind his portrayal of dealing with the loss of loved ones is his most off-putting aspect. Personally, I adapt this section of the Enchiridion to make it more acceptable to my way of thinking. When you kiss your wife or child, say to yourself that you are kissing a human being, and when they die, you will not be overcome by grief. Epictetus is often regarded as the harshest of the Stoics, seemingly indicating that the goal is to free ourselves from sadness completely, tossing away grief for a dead spouse or child as if tossing aside an empty seashell on the beach. Epictetus is one of my favorite philosophers, but this is one area in which I seem to have a disagreement with him. Remember that in philosophy we have no divinely delivered revelatory texts. The philosophers were not prophets. They were regular human beings like you and me, and they were fallible. So it is perfectly okay to disagree with them. Of course, at a certain point, if you deviate too much from the defining characteristics of Stoicism, you are no longer practicing Stoicism, but rather something else, which is also fine, if it's done well. However, the topic of grief is an area where there were differences of opinion within the school. As opposed to the hard view of Epictetus, I find Seneca more approachable and understandable on the topic of sadness related to the death of people that are important to us. In the following passage, Seneca reminds his friend Lucilius that death is an inevitable part of life, and living in blindness or denial of that fact sets us up for devastating shock when death intrudes, especially if the death is sudden. He who writes these words to you is no other than I, who wept so excessively for my dear friend Aeneas Serenus. So, in spite of my wishes, I must be included among the examples of men who have been overcome by grief. Today, however, I condemn this act of mine, and I understand the reason why I lamented so greatly was chiefly that I had never imagined it possible for his death to precede mine. The only thought which occurred to my mind was that he was the younger, and much younger too, as if the fates kept to the order of our ages. In former days I ought to have said, my friend Serenus is younger than I, but what does that matter? He would naturally die after me, but he may precede me. It was just because I did not do this that I was unprepared when fortune dealt me the sudden blow. Now is the time for you to reflect, not only that all things are mortal, but also that their mortality is subject to no fixed law. Whatever can happen at any time can happen today. Seneca, Letter 63. Frequently reminding ourselves of our loved one's mortality might sound morbid and depressing at first, but actually, reminding yourself of that the time you have with your loved one is brief enhances your time together. Realizing that the time we have with our loved one is limited encourages us to appreciate them more and make the most of our time with them, to really pay attention to them, to make time to be with them. When your spouse or child is in your presence, don't get lost in your phone. Do something that actively engages with your friend or loved one. Go for a walk, conversate, play a game, help in the garden, do chores to show you care, support your child's athletics or artistic endeavors. When a dispute arises with your loved one, mindfulness of their mortality will also likely motivate you to find a way to reconcile as quickly as possible, rather than let the anger fester and worsen. The combination of attentiveness to loved ones and the openness to reconciliation can't help but improve your relationships. A common misconception of Stoicism is that Stoic practitioners suppress their emotions and bottle them up, that Stoics are as cold and stone-like as the Vulcans in Star Trek. That is not an accurate description. Let not the eyes be dry when we have lost a friend, nor let them overflow. We may weep, but we must not wail. Seneca, Letter 63. The reason Stoic practitioners try not to allow grief to overwhelm them is because grief is a passion. The reason we try to avoid falling into a passion is that Stoicism is largely about fulfilling our social roles through appropriate action. Passions are emotions powerful enough to cloud our perceptions and our judgment. It is unlikely that someone overcome by a passion would be able to behave appropriately to fulfill their social duties. Don't judge yourself harshly for feeling sadness as if you were failing to be a good Stoic. Stoicism is not about emotional suppression. Feel your sadness. You should feel your sadness. Humans are inherently social creatures, and it is only natural to feel sadness when a friend or a loved one dies. However, there is sadness, and then there is the passion of grief. Within sadness, we can continue to function as we process our loss. On the other hand, passions, such as grief, overwhelm our reason and make it so we cannot behave appropriately. If we are locked inside ourselves with grief, we are not benefiting our lost loved one, ourselves, or the people with whom we still share the world. Even with all that said, if you find yourself overcome with grief and rendered helpless for a time, be kind to yourself. Only the sage would be able to eliminate passions like grief from their lives completely, and it is unclear whether a flesh and blood sage has ever walked the earth. For us humble progressors, we are striving to mitigate passions as much as we can. In the following passage, Seneca is referring to separation from a friend who is still living, but I think it can equally be applied to someone you have lost. A friend should be retained in the spirit. Such a friend can never be absent. He can see every day whomsoever he wishes. I would therefore share my studies with you, my meals, my walks. Seneca, Letter 55. Another misconception about Stoicism is that it makes us unfeeling toward the suffering of others, that if we see someone struggling with grief that we will shrug our shoulders and move on, saying that the emotions of others are not up to us and therefore are nothing to us. It is true that other people's emotions are not up to us and therefore do not directly reflect on our own character. However, what does reflect negatively on our character is witnessing the suffering of a fellow human being and responding with callous disregard. Being able to discuss death unflinchingly gives you an opportunity to be more helpful to your fellow humans. For example, people often feel isolated in their grief because they know the topic of death is uncomfortable and distressing to most people. If they try to open up to you and see that you are not flinching away from them, they may be comfortable to express themselves to you, and you could offer them solace. Please note that you can sympathize with someone without taking on that suffering yourself. How would it be useful for both of you to be suffering from the passion of grief? When you see someone weeping in sorrow, do not hesitate to sympathize with him so far as words go, and, if occasion offers, even to groan with him. But be careful not to groan also in the center of your being. Epictetus, excerpted portion of Enchiridion 16. This passage touches on the difference between sympathy and empathy. When you are sympathetic, you feel a sincere concern for someone who is experiencing something difficult or painful. As social animals, we should want to ease our fellow humans' suffering when they are in distress. On the other hand, empathy takes things a step further. Empathy includes vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another person. To be helpful to our fellow humans, it is important that we not fall into the grip of a passion such as grief. What good will it do the person who is suffering if you take that suffering into yourself? Then there are two people suffering instead of one. By all means, sympathize with the grief-stricken person and be present for them and listen, but try not to internalize their suffering. Let us see to it that the recollection of those whom we have lost becomes a pleasant memory to us. No man thinks back with pleasure to any subject which he will not be able to reflect upon without pain. So too it cannot but be that the names of those whom we have loved and lost come back to us with a sort of sting, but there is a pleasure even in this sting. The remembrance of lost friends is pleasant in the same way that certain fruits have an agreeably acid taste, or as in extremely old wines, it is their very bitterness that pleases us. Indeed, after a certain lapse of time, every thought that gave pain is quenched, and the pleasure comes back to us unalloyed. To me, the thought of my dead friends is sweet and appealing, for I had them knowing that I should one day lose them, and now that I have lost them, it is as if I have them still. Seneca, Letter 63. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please send us an email at sundaystoic@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on whatever platform you use to listen to us. Your feedback helps us to reach new audience members and build the podcast. We look forward to releasing a new episode next week, fate permitting, and as Steve always says, Carpe Diem!